All right. How's everyone tonight? Survive the cold weather? Just to get it again. I know. Well, that's what they said. Somebody says it's going to get warmer tomorrow and then get to cold again on Friday. It's like, just stay one or the other, at least for a moment. Uh, but don't want to complain too much because tonight we're going to talk about happiness. Who wants to be happy? Maybe you don't like to be happy, right? Probably more happier than maybe we are right now. So Beatitude will also kind of explain. This is kind of the Catholic word that we use for happiness. This is like the deep, enduring kind of happiness that I think we really all long for. So we have a specific word for it, Beatitude. So we'll look at that. But the context of happiness that we want to talk about is the context of the area of morality within the church. So sometimes when we think of morality, sometimes we might think of the church as just a whole bunch of rules that we're supposed to follow. You got the Ten Commandments, you got all the you're supposed to go to Mass and go to confession, and you got all these different kinds of rules within the church. And some people will be like, yeah, all the rules that you just have are so restrictive. That it's all about the things you can't do, and like the Ten Commandments are mainly those, right? It's like thou shalt nots. And all the things that you're supposed to do as well. So is the church just simply about rules? Well, what we'll discover is that it has to do directly with happiness. It's not just thing God imposes upon us to make us miserable, restrict our freedom, but actually it's to increase our freedom and to help us experience happiness, and really happiness that for many who are coming from like outside of that kind of idea, a deeper happiness that they didn't even know was even possible in their lives. So to kind of help us understand how these are coordinated with one another, there is a analogy that I like to use with the high school students. Well, when I'm teaching the seniors, I actually teach them a lesson on this to kind of introduce them, because then we get into some real nitty-gritty moral issues, especially controversial type issues, and help them think through about why the church says certain things in the area of morality. And so to introduce this, an analogy that we have is like say you're on a sports team or you're in some kind of activity. What is your goal? What do you want to occur if you're on a team? Anyone? Win. You want to win, right? You don't go on a team and you put all the work into it, being like, well, I'm just here just to show up. If we have fun, you're told it's like, we're just here to have fun. We don't have to win. Well, you kind of want to win, right? If you don't go into a game, if you're already thinking that you're not going to win, well, it's kind of self-defeating. So yeah, we want to win. That's the goal, right? So in order to win, what does a team need to do? Kind of things. Got to work together. Yep. Can't do it by yourself. Got to have teamwork. Other things that would help them be successful. Got to do practices. Yep, communicate with one another and also with who else usually? The coach, right? You got to pay attention to the coach. In your practices, you probably got to pay attention to learning the plays. You got a playbook, you have to pay attention to the playbook. You got to have the discipline enough to keep at it, right? Because is every single practice probably always going to be the most fun thing ever? Probably not. There's going to be times in which you would prefer not to put all this effort in. You don't want to do the conditioning. So there's all sorts of things. Oh, part of this too is whatever sport that you're doing, you kind of have to know the rules, right? Every single sport has some kind of rules. What happens if you don't know the rules well enough? Yeah, you might not be able to follow the rules, and if you don't follow the rules, you get a penalty. Is that going to help you achieve your goal and win? Usually not, right? That's the whole purpose of the penalty is, since you didn't follow the rules, something detrimental is going to happen in your ability to win. So this analogy is really one that we can apply to our understanding of what morality is all about. So if we apply it, we have our playbook that we need to follow, right? So the more we know of the playbook, the Bible, we have a coach that we should listen to, right? Jesus. Want to listen to him. We want to practice. the faith. So that's doing all the good, spending time in prayer, going to Mass, going to reconciliation, all those kinds of things. Those are part of practicing the faith. To live as Christian, we don't do it by ourselves. We need teamwork. We need to work together. It's so much easier when we support one another in doing that. So, like, your kids need your help to do that, and sometimes your kids can challenge you to be involved in a little bit deeper way than maybe you would just on your own. Same thing within marriage. Spouses can assist one another in growing in the faith, as well as friends. I'm here to assist you as well. Also, we need to know the rules, right? And the rules, similarly, we'll find, just as in sports, the rules are there not to be, oppressive to those that are playing it. It opens up a freedom to be able to play. Like, if you had, like, basketball team and you had absolutely no rules that were set, how fun is that going to be? I always think about, sometimes you go out on the playground and the kids they've made up a game or something and they're playing, and in the midst of the game they decide to change the rules around. Well, they ended up getting mad at each other more than anything, and if there wasn't specific rules that don't change, they would never get anywhere and they have a lot less fun. So it's the same thing with the faith. We need these, God knows that we need these rules that help lead us to our goal. We said in sports, our goal is to win. What about when it comes to life? What's our goal? Well, it's to win. It's still to win, but instead of winning like a trophy or a medal, what are we told we can win instead? Heaven, yes. And we'll find that the name that we give to heaven is eternal happiness. So, big difference though between sports and life is that in one case we have human rules, right? We kind of made up the rules for the different specific sports. But when it comes to life, God's the one who made the rules. So maybe in human sports, if you have the people in charge of it, they could change certain rules. But when it comes to God's rules, he's the only one who could change them. And he's told us that he doesn't change them because he's based them off of what will lead us to happiness. So what will lead us to the goal, since the goal doesn't change for God, for our lives, so too his rules to assist us to reach that goal also don't change. So the church has these rules because it's important to help us reach happiness. So are we all in agreement that you would like to be happy? Aren't most of the things you'd rather be miserable all the time? I think if we're honest, nobody enjoys being miserable, right? And everything we do, in a sense, is to have some kind of happiness. Even though maybe at times we do things that we find out afterwards, well, maybe that doesn't bring me as much happiness as I thought. A way that we can think about is that there's different kind of levels of happiness that we can experience. So we can think of them in terms of 4 levels of happiness. So the very first kind of basic level of happiness is immediate gratification. So if you think about it, this is basically the way your kids, when they're babies, up till who knows what age, they basically kind of live out of this first level of happiness, right? So immediate gratification. I have this desire for something that I want to fulfill, and I won't be happy unless it's fulfilled. So you can think about it in terms of food, right? So you have a baby. They're hungry, right? They want to be immediately gratified, and they're very unhappy until they get that, right? And then when they get that, they're happy pretty quickly, right? So in this first level of happiness, we'll notice that it's a level of happiness that, for most things, it doesn't necessarily take a lot of time to get to being happy, but it also doesn't last all that long. So like specifically in the area of food, I mean, if you have any boys, you might be discovering, right? They can't last very long, and then they're suddenly hungry again, right? So immediate gratification, even though we can get it fairly quickly, it's a very short-term kind of happiness. It's not satisfying for very long until we need something new to fulfill it. So this is the first level of happiness. It's not a bad thing. Obviously, God designed us with those kinds of desires, so it's not bad. though we'll find that it can get bad if we make that level of happiness the most important or more important than the other levels. So if we keep going, the second level of happiness has to do with personal achievement. So it says you put a lot of work and effort into something and you're successful, whether it be in something like, winning in sports, or, doing well in your work, or, whatever kind of thing that you want to achieve. Now, compared to immediate gratification, can you get to that level? Can you get to the happiness as quickly? Usually it takes a little bit longer, right? Depending upon what it is that you're trying to achieve, it could take a lot longer. It could take years maybe to get to that achievement. What about after you've achieved it? How long does the happiness last compared to the first level? Usually longer, right? And maybe so far into like how much effort you had to put into it could cause it. Of course, sometimes we put a whole bunch of effort into certain things and we realize afterwards, oh wait, it doesn't make me as happy as I thought it would. But personal achievement takes a little bit longer, but the happiness lasts a little bit longer, but it doesn't last forever. I can think back to, I was in track when I was in high school. I was able to win a few medals. I was happy about that at the time. Those medals play zero part in my happiness today. So you can probably think of things that are similar in your life. Things that made you happy in the past, but today really have no bearing upon your current level of happiness. And so it only lasts a certain amount of time. So we need something more. We need a further level of happiness. The third level of happiness is doing good for others. Now, hopefully you can think of how this is true. Of a time in which you do something that is good for somebody else, and you feel real fulfilled having done that good for them, even if it didn't do anything for yourself. But you feel like, wow, I'm glad that I did that good deed for that person. Now, compared to the first two, how long does it take usually to get to the happiness that it's going to produce? Depending upon what it is, it could take a little bit longer. It could even be that, for example, it might be that you're initially not all that happy of having to do it. Right? So, for example, as a priest, even my whole job is helping do good for other people, right? But sometimes if somebody, it's an emergency call in the middle of the night, that phone rings, and I'm in bed, and I hear that going, it's like my initial human reaction is not a lot of happiness at that moment. But if I follow what God asks of me and I do what he's asking and go and help that person, there has never been a time where after I've done some kind of good act, where afterwards I'm like, man, I wish I hadn't done that. No, there's always this greater happiness. But it does take a little bit more. And there might not have been happiness even leading up to doing it. So in the case of trying to teach your kids to do kind of good things, right? They might fight you as hard as they can. We're not going to do that leading up to it. And hopefully as they continue to grow, they get to a point in which they realize, wow, it actually is really good that I'm helping people. The happiness that we get from it. Also, how long does that happiness last afterwards compared to the previous ones? Usually a lot longer, right? It's much more fulfilling than the first two. But even those aren't everything that we long for. There's a final level of happiness, and that's God himself, our ultimate good. He's the only one who can satisfy what we really long for. We want happiness that's without end. And in order to achieve that, we need a relationship with the Lord. So that's what we're really made for. The name for that is heaven, or blessedness, beatitude, the beatific vision, sometimes called seeing God in heaven. Now, how long does it take to get to that happiness? Could be a lot more difficult, right? It takes a lot of work. There's going to be lots of moments where it doesn't feel like you're all that happy about it. You come to Mass, you spend time in prayer. Not every single moment of that makes you feel all great. But when we achieve happiness, even while we're here on earth, we can achieve the saints did in particular. They achieved a high level of connectedness with God, and so experienced a lot more happiness than most do. But then, how long does it last? Forever. Yep, forever. So there is no end to it. And that's what God desires for us. He's created in us a longing for happiness that doesn't end. And the only thing that's going to be able to fulfill that is God himself. Now, does that mean that the first three levels of happiness, we should never pursue anything in those areas? No, it's perfectly fine. God made those things. So we should definitely do good for others. He commands that, right? We can definitely achieve things for ourselves as well as, enjoy the things of life as long as we put them in the right order, right? If we put them in the wrong order, that's when we'll find that the things that ought to make us happy end up making ourselves miserable instead. So if you think about a person who, let's say their life is entirely about immediate gratification. They're all about money and possessions and fulfilling their desires immediately. And those kind of people kind of go from one thing to the next. They're searching for something that will fulfill them. And one after another, it never really works. Another example would be like somebody that gets caught in some kind of addiction. They're trying to fulfill a desire by going after something more and more and more and more. But because they don't have the rest of these in their life, they just end up being miserable. So that's oftentimes where our sins come up, is that we're pursuing something in usually oftentimes it's in the first two areas. We're pursuing those things that we think are going to make us happy, and we find out afterwards, after we've pursued them, that actually this doesn't make me happy. But if we're pursuing the last two, then we can pursue the first two as well, and they'll fit better into the picture, and we'll be able to have happiness in a greater way even here on earth. So if we want eternal happiness, if we want to have forever, how do we get it? How do we ensure that we have these in the proper order and we're focused on also making sure that we're on our way to eternal happiness? Well, that's a great question. The question that we find asked of Jesus in the Bible. It's the rich young man in the scriptures who asked this very question. And he comes to Jesus and says, "Teacher, what good must I do to have eternal life? So what do I need to do in order to be focused on my goal, to win?" And so Jesus' initial response to him is, if you wish to enter into life, keep the commandments. So here's the connection that we have between happiness and God's laws. So the whole purpose of God's laws are to give us that specific path that we are to follow so that we can reach happiness. It helps us, be able to sort some of these out, which is more important than others. So the Ten Commandments that God gave in the Old Testament through Moses to the people of Israel, actually we find wonderfully later on the Israelites, especially in the Psalms, they proclaim how blessed they are by God for receiving his laws. So more blessed than other nations. Now, sometimes as in our modern era, we can think of laws as being very restrictive, and we could think of well, without these laws, we'd have so much more freedom, and we'd be much happier without the laws. Well, that was not how they saw it. They saw truthfully that, yes, since God has given us this path, now we know how to be happy. Now we know the way to go. Of course, does that mean they were always perfect in following it? No. In fact, almost immediately after they got these laws, this is what happened, right? They worship the golden calf, they turn away from God, they go their own path. So what we'll find is that God simply giving the law does from God, it's set one way and it applies the same to every single person because we didn't decide it. So when it comes to conscience, it doesn't mean that whatever we think is right, we can do. Conscience, instead, is the way the church describes it is the place within us where God speaks his laws to us, his truths about what we should and should not do. And our conscience is that which helps us apply God's laws to the specific, says the opposite. That is impossible to be true. And if there's ever any question, well, my conscience seems to be telling me this, but the church says something opposite. The church is what's correct, and your conscience is misinformed. It is not formed correctly. So our conscience needs to be well formed. So from all those things, then we have the knowledge of we are to go to Mass on Sunday. So therefore, if we follow our conscience, then we decide better car. Those things will make us happy. But Jesus says in these Beatitudes, no, that is not going to make you happy. And people who pursue it end up being kind of miserable. That we need to be poor, not necessarily just poor monetarily, because you could actually have wealth and be happy. But it's what's our attitude toward it? Are we poor in spirit? Are we not? If we're attached to those things, then we're not going to be happy. But if we're detached from them in a way in which there's other things that make us happy, it's also a very important thing, is that we don't, even though we forgive evil, we also don't allow evil to continue. So there's a both and sometimes we can struggle with balancing those two. But they're both important parts of being a peacemaker. Finally, blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So